you guys feeling today?
Do you meet most of your VR friends in VR, or do you meet a lot of them IRL?
The inspiration to really make my own club came from being bullied while I was in VRChat going to another club. How can emotional intimacy look like in the metaverse? I give you a VR hug.
Yeah. Virtual hug.
I'm also a pole dancer, I love dance. If I'm not standing my ground, I'm basically in a very vulnerable position. It was the most important thing to have a safe space. Space is a multi-chain metaverse, so they have Polygon, Solana. I've only been minting on Ethereum. I couldn't be a pole dancer in real reality, but then in VR, I can do it. I'm as free as I can be to enjoy partying or dancing.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our podcast. I'm super pleased to have a friend of mine, Sara Vogl, who is a virtual reality artist and somebody who creates things in the metaverse, joining us for today's podcast. So welcome, Sara. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. I'd love to kick it off with maybe just an introduction of yourself, kind of how, what do you do? Tell our listeners what do you do, and would just love to hear about your path to VR, XR, the metaverse, whatever it is we're calling it nowadays.
I'm Sara, and I work in VR. I'm a VR creator actually since 2013 with the Oculus Rift DK1. That's when I started developing immersive installations back then, because we actually didn't think it's going to be an industry and it's going to be as successful and actually turn into a job. So that was all very surprising to me. I was in very different areas of VR, working mostly with communities and around communities, and always as a VR creator myself. And especially since the pandemic, when there were people online. So basically, when we came to that point where VR wasn't a thing that I either do at home and show other people at home, or I'm going to an event, but then I have to showcase my exhibit. And that can also be a very straining experience after a while, doing a lot of demos, explaining VR to new people. Now it's actually that since the pandemic, you were going into social VR, and there were a lot of people that use VR in their everyday lives. They're actually in there. So I would say since that happened, I'm spending a lot of time, actually most of my work time in VR social spaces. And I created a social persona called Root, where I do all kinds of different things in virtual reality. I do full body tracked pole dance, and I also run my own club. It's called Roots Club. So yeah, it's been a really, really interesting experience, diving into Web3 and the whole NFT space, as well as my club is also in an NFT on the blockchain. So yeah, these are all areas I was diving into in VR. I also studied 4 semesters of humanoid robotics. So I'm also really interested in everything sensory. I also have a couple mods on my headsets where basically really profit from my experience in electronics and so on. So yeah, I'm pretty much interested in the whole technology field around VR, robotics, AI, and so on.
I think that's pretty incredible, and so much to unpack there. And I guess just speaking of which, I think we met because of our involvement with a council in the World Economic Forum. So shout out to our friends in the council. Shout out to our friend Stephanie, who is our fearless chair there. It was a lot of fun to meet a lot of great people there, including you. Yeah,
it's such an amazing group. And yeah, I think I've joined the council in 2018, and it's just been a really amazing like couple of years of like learning, meeting new interesting people, being also part of such amazing initiatives that they're driving forward right now and keep on doing with the metaverse. And also, I'm a co-founder of Women in Immersive Tech. I didn't even mention that, which is an NGO that's based in Brussels. And we basically organize events and help like underrepresented groups and minorities in general to dive into VR, AR.
A lot of people in this industry, it's kind of very new, right? I mean, for a lot of us, there's a lot of kind of different skill sets. And what's intriguing is you seem to combine a lot of different skill sets together, for this brand new form, this kind of new media form that's emerging. How, what are the things you had to learn, or what things that you learned in the past do you think have come in handy now that you are a full-time creator in the metaverse?
You still have to kind of like agree on what the metaverse really means. Like, is it like really the headset, and is it really VR driven, or is it also 2D or like desktop three-dimensional spaces that you enter on a 2D medium? So I think there are really like a couple of things that are not fully clear, but the metaverse that I'm creating for, which is VR and which is like fully immersive and a fully immersive space with like fully interactive characters that can change their clothes, etc., etc. I think all my knowledge, like from studying communication arts and interactive media in Hamburg at Design Factory, which was very much about design, 3D design. That's when I first got into 3D design and actually creating objects. I think all these skill sets are really, really valuable, because when it comes to VR, it's a lot like designing in the real world. Right? Like, obviously there are a couple of different needs that we have, but a lot of the things in terms of style and design and what works, user experience, etc., just like the design thinking behind that, I think it's like super, super important and really, really useful. I think for people, especially like in the UX design area, when people are not yet focused so much on are specialized in mobile UX design, but actually go the way and say like, okay, how can I approach UX design in VR? I think there's so many opportunities. And that goes from like architecture backgrounds, for example, that are dealing so much with what does a room do and what does a room have to enable, right? And all of that we're very much needing and using in the design of VR spaces. And then when it comes to personalities, again, things like the backgrounds in like trend design and also just like a bit of fashion design, etc., I think makes an amazing creator these days. So if there's people out there that already are good in these areas, that know, like, I know how something should flow or sit or look at the body, then I think it's a great like opportunity to step into that space. Obviously, there's also a lot of technology that comes into that. And I think from my background and like especially dealing a lot with robotics and electronics, there's a very, very interesting component to haptics. And what we're seeing currently, for example, with devices like the Tesla suit or also previously be haptics, vests and suits, all of that is very, very interesting when you think about like, how do I feel and what do I do in the metaverse to just add that extra layer of sensory experience. And I think this is really then where anyone can like come into the space with the knowledge of, for example, a masseuse, or like you do certain therapies in VR because they are possible and people have the opportunity. So I think like all these kind of skill sets are so very useful, as this is a space that I think we can't even yet like see what kind of jobs we are going to be creating in this field, because it's still like beyond our imagination to grasp like, what are people going to do in the metaverse? How are they going to interact?
Yeah, I love that kind of the combining of the kind of old guard with the new, kind of new technologies with kind of old principles. One of the things I think a lot about, even from the early stages when we created things, was architecture, how architecture matters so much. So in the worlds and stuff we were creating, it's like, to your point, how does the architecture fit with the human use case of the space? And what's interesting is you can get a lot from traditional architecture, but there's a lot of things that you don't get from traditional architecture. For example, there's like teleportation that you can't do in, obviously, in reality, but you can do in VR. So there's so much to kind of unpack there and think about. But I'd love to get a sense of how did, so 2013 DK1. I also had the DK1, so back in those OG days, and there was no positional tracking. It's really just just kind of roll, pitch, yaw, the sort of 3 degrees of freedom. As someone who's been, around in this phase of VR, as we've both been, how has your opinion of things changed over time? So, 2013, we all got excited. You had the DK1, and you had the Oculus Kickstarter, and then you had the acquisition by Facebook, now Meta, in 2014, and then of course, just this is kind of this wave, and in that wave, we've had what some people call a VR winter, right? So, but things are, seem to be picking back up. I'd be curious, have you just been, you got hooked in 2013 and that's it, or has your opinion on things changed? What have your opinions have changed since 2013, I guess, is my core question about VR and the metaverse overall.
Yeah, very interesting and very big question. I would say what changed for myself especially, and I'm going to start with that, is that I got to notice that VR is actually so very powerful. And I noticed on myself, on my behavior, that VR does something to me. So I did develop a VR experience at the time called lucid trips, which is inspired by lucid dreaming, which lets you embody like a kind of weightless being with like 2 ghost-like arms that you can like float and fly around. And we also built a quadrocopter-based wind feedback that is directly linked to the avatar's moving speed and direction. So you basically get this full immersion of like, I go up, I go down, I go right, I go left, and so on. So this is basically has been such an impact on how I feel myself, my body, and the capabilities of myself, and then looking into the research that has already been done, which is huge. But I came to it from my own experience, and that has been throughout that time. So that is something that like in that time when VR was like going down and like being a bit less in the press, or rather negative in the press for some time, that's what I've been diving into very deep. And I think in general, coming out of this low and coming out of this phase, a lot of the ideas around VR matured a lot. Like we see a lot more in healthcare, in education. We see a lot more that is like closer to humans and needs, like what are humans' needs that we can't fulfill right now in a great way in reality, and really like diving deeper into those use cases that have previously been there, but that haven't been part of the initial hype around the DK1, like 13, 14, 15. But they actually came up after that hype, because that was something like, oh, that's actually sustainable, that actually makes sense, and it makes sense on the long term. And there's research and studies that we can take and say like, okay, this actually has been proven to make sense previously, and now we have the technology and we can put it all together. So I think we were just moving away from like this initial hype around a technology, which we now saw a lot with blockchain and NFTs, like where there's like this initial hype, but what is it really good for wasn't really clear at the time. And there was a lot of negative press, obviously, as well. So yeah, from my perspective, that's a bit what we're seeing currently. And I was actually happy for the press and the hype to calm down for a while, to make sure like this is an industry that makes sense, you know. Like I think it's important to have this time to mature and to actually figure out like what are the things that are making sense for the future.
Yeah, I think that's such a great perspective, especially, you know, sustained engagement is so important when it comes to, you know, any technology, whether it's NFTs or, you know, or virtual reality. And to your point, I think time has just clarified what it is people use things for. And one of the great tests is what kinds of things were around in the early days of VR, because there's so many like tech demos and stuff like that. But then the sustained engagement came from, you know, I mean, frankly, things like Beat Saber, right, which is, you know, relatively early and still has great sustained engagement, and also social VR. So speaking of social VR, and not all social VR, right? I mean, there have been some social VR experiments for sure that have not, you know, had that ability to get the network effects and the takeoff velocity. But tell us your journey to social VR. I remember mine very distinctly when I first got in. And it was actually something we created ourselves at Penrose, something called Maestro, but just the magic of having even just a head and hands be in a world with you was so incredible. So I'd love to hear since you spent so much time in social VR, I'd love to, what was like that origin, that first spark moment of social VR, and describe that to us.
Yeah, another really interesting one, because I had that twice. So the first time I discovered back then VRChat, or fully discovered it, was in January 2016, where I did a performance with a friend of mine who's the founder of an independent gaming festival in Berlin called Amaze. And we were basically a installation piece inside the Game Science Center in Berlin for 48 hours straight, where he was wearing the headset and I was his VR shaman. So he was the VR node, I was the VR shaman. I took care of him and put him through a lot of different experiences. So I showed him like some of the early content. So we have to remember that the Vive wasn't launched back then. So it was like one of the early dev kits, but there was no official content out there. But as a developer, you had to upload your content if you want the people at Valve to check out your content to give you feedback. And with that, every other developer that had that dev kit could also see your content. So that was the thing that they did for us to get more inspiration from each other and just share what we're learning as well. And so we had the access to all the other developers' builds. So that was basically like the basis of what I started with, but for 48 hours, it wasn't enough. So I organized parties in different social VR spaces, which was back then Altspace and VRChat actually only.
No, Rec Room was around back then.
There was a couple other ones as well, but in the end, we only ended up going into Altspace and VRChat because of the people, because like the people were like, oh, we only have accounts here. Like I invited a couple of his friends. But then what was mind-blowing is that in VRChat, the people were so engaged and they watched us on the live stream, and then they built a world that looked like our room that we were in. And then in this world, they streamed our live stream and they built avatars that looked like us. So then we were going in there, and it was basically like an inception moment where it was like, oh my gosh. And this was like with people all over the world we didn't knew back then. It was like such a bonding experience, and they organized a firework for like when the 48 hours was over. And tourists, like my friend, his wife and kid were there like after the 48 hours, and he was in the headset and was like, oh, I don't want to leave my new friends. And then like taking the headset off and saw his family. And like back then it was really like there were some crashes, but he never took the headset off. And that was really like one of the first times someone stayed in there for so long. Yeah, so this was my first time, but then I kept coming back to VRChat, but there wasn't a lot going on. So
Wait,
there was
no sleep. There was no sleep for 48 hours too, or did he sleep?
He actually did nap. So I did build him a cave in Lucid Trips, all the way up on the mountain. And so his evening task was actually to walk up that mountain in the evening and lay in his pink cave. Like he's branded very pink, and we were wearing pink onesies throughout the whole time, and there were like visitors coming by and so on. But yeah, it was there was a documentation made about this as well, so I can send you that sometime. And then yeah, I kind of came back a couple times, but I never really like found my people. I was in a talk show once at Gunter's Universe, which was kind of cool and really nice, but then I never caught on to it. And then just with COVID, actually. So because of COVID, all the film festivals were in VR, like South by Southwest 2020, also Venice VR, and so on. And so I went in there, and all of a sudden, VRChat was full with people that I kind of knew, or at least like it felt like friends, and so many of them, you know. And it was so all of a sudden like, oh, this was what I was always waiting for, that there's actually cool people that like, or like my group of people that I can hang out with in VR more than previously. And also way more females. I feel like with the film festivals, all of a sudden there were so much more female users in VRChat as well. And then I very soon had my first experience where I got bullied very badly in VRChat by a group of teenagers, probably. And it really hit me relatively hard. Like, I'm usually very immersed in VR, and it was like a rather hard experience for me. And I kind of didn't feel safe that much anymore in VRChat, in public worlds especially. And then I did a piece about that called Exploring Home. And I showed that, and I premiered it at last year's Venice Biennale Festival, actually. And I performed it for 19 days in a row, 3 times a day. So it was like, I put a lot of visitors through that. It was a very cool experience. And it was also good to talk about that, because it's like so important to like, I was basically keeping my authenticity and like wearing an avatar that felt very authentic to me, but people were telling me they're hiding my avatar. So many people. And then also were telling me why I wouldn't want to be a better version of myself, and why I wouldn't want to look pretty. And I was like incredibly flashback to my childhood, where I was like a darker skinned child, you know, and my skin wasn't as all right with like a couple of people. And so this like gave me like a lot of reason to kind of like make this piece, and especially in such an environment where like young people are in a lot of manga, anime, and furry avatars. You know, those are the two like big groups, like animes and furries. And if you're different, you are different, and they make you know that that's not what they want. So yeah, so that's what I saw there very much. And then I kept digging around a little bit, and a platform that I really like, and how it's structured and how it's built and how it's run as well, at least like for what I experienced for now, is Somnium Space. I looked at all the other ones obviously as well, but Somnium Space is a very open platform. It's very flexible, especially from the point of a creator. So as I'm like creating my own worlds and interactions in Unity, in Somnium Space, you can just use Unity bolt scripts and basically bring them all in. So that's like an amazing opportunity for me to basically like really do whatever I want in my world, invite the people I want, and keep the people I don't like out, because I can just like script it in there that way. And so that was really something that like made me go in VR like every day and keep going back. And then also hosting a lot of parties. And you've actually recently been at a party. So
That's right.
yeah, it was amazing to see you at your cat self, as your cat self.
I love being the cat self. Thank you for the avatar, because you know in Somnium it's a little different to set up the avatar system. You have to get a certain Unity version and set up. But I can't wait to talk about the party and actually jump into VR. But kind of to chat a little bit about the story you shared. I mean, it's really interesting because you know cyberbullying is a big topic. You know, just generally but I think in VR it's even more visceral because it feels so much more real, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, you have safety bubbles and you can block people and you can teleport to other worlds, but kind of in that moment it can be, just very visceral in a way that a screen kind of is not. So really, really interested to hear, and thanks for sharing that story. To kind of just
Yeah.
so many random questions, but one thing is, what do you think is the reason and the driver that there are so much anime and so many furries in social VR? Is that just like an accident of history? Is it that maybe people with body dysphoria kind of go into VR to help, solve that? I don't know what the answer is. I'm actually, since you have more experience, I'd love to know. Is like, because it just seems like that's kind of those are the elephants in the room, basically, right? When it comes to social VR, unless you're in like an alt space or a rec room where your avatar is defined. For all the ones where it can just get uploaded, that seems to be the thing people want.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's actually only VRChat as a social VR space that has that. So when you go into Neos, it does have it way less already. And when you go into Somnium space, it has it even less, I would say. Like there's barely any furries, barely any anime avatars. A big reason, obviously, for VRChat and the first initial anime trends are trends that have been set by the people that came in early on. And obviously, and something that I think is like an amazing thing, an amazing opportunity for so many people is that especially trans and also non-binary people can go into VR and embody the gender that like their body might not fit with, right? So we are definitely seeing a lot of male users wearing female anime avatars. And that was like a trend that really got that going. And a lot of men do report that they feel really good in those avatars and that they let them also explore their feminine side a bit more. And I think this is an immensely interesting phenomenon that is still relatively young, but that definitely is something to look at. And I think it's a huge opportunity to do that in VR. That's actually something I'm also very interested in the opportunity itself with Roots Club. On the other hand, though, what probably played a big role in making it so popular is VRoid. VRoid is an application that lets you create kind of drag and drop, like Ready Player Me, your own anime avatar. And you have all the rights for that. Like it's completely copyright free and you own all the commercial rights. So I think this had like a big impact because it was so accessible, right? Everyone could make their favorite character, they could make it themselves, etc. And then the furries, yeah, I really don't know like what got that so big, but definitely it has something to do with not wanting to be a human. That's clear. And actually any kind of animal is more or less a furry. So I would say like it's just like an animal trend. In my case, like in Roots Club, I make naked cats, which is probably like the least furry animal that you could make in VR. But yeah, those trends are pretty widespread, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see the trends emerge and the kinds of things that when you give the internet things to do, what kind of comes back is always unexpected, but also very human and at the same time somehow understandable. And yeah, it's always interesting to see what the internet does to things you give it. So yeah, I think one question is around, actually, you mentioned Unity a few times, right? I mean, Unity is such a great tool for using, it's actually used a lot in Somnium space. I notice even just uploading avatar, you need kind of Unity in a specific version, creating worlds in VRChat. One question I actually have is, we use Unity and Unreal. It's interesting that there's no application like a VRChat Somnium space or Neos that is on Unreal Engine. Actually, there's only things that are on Unity. I think CryptoVoxels is on Godot Engine, actually, so that might be a slight, but that's also like web access. Any thoughts on, because if the common denominator in social VR is Unity, that's kind of very interesting, right? Because then it's actually Unity that's kind of the core tool, and you wonder if Unreal Engine, maybe it's just an accident of history. I mean, there's plenty of great games in VR in Unreal, like Asgard's Wrath or a bunch of other Robo Recall. But I'd be curious about, yeah, I mean, has Unity just kind of won social VR, or is it too early to tell at this point?
Yeah, I would say so. And I would say so for a kind of funny reason, but that's like my own very personal thought about this, is that, how people say about Unreal, it looks better than Unity. So the thing is, if you take the newer Unity versions and you put a lot of effort and time in there and you work really great with shaders, you can get things to be indistinguishable from an Unreal product. So in Unreal, everything out of the box looks really good. And you don't have to do so much, but you would need to do so much to optimize it so it would run on VR and on like certain like VR platforms, especially with user-generated content. And then all of a sudden, then you optimize the Unreal stuff and you make it like compatible with like what we're using currently for social VR, which is like old school Unity versions, like 2018, 2019. Then like the things wouldn't look good. And then it's like, oh, you did use Unreal. How did you make Unreal look so bad? That would probably then the question that would be asked. For Unity, people are used to it. Social VR doesn't look that great visually, but because Unity has always been a community tool, a prototyping tool, and a tool where you just are not afraid of things looking like blocks, because it's about like figuring out a certain thing inside Unity, a certain functionality usually, because that's where Unity is versatile, right? You can script anything, you have all the integration packages, etc., etc. It's just more versatile. And that's another reason, because like Unreal doesn't have as many integrations, it doesn't have as open of a scripting as like environment, like the whole like source code that you can basically go in Unreal, like it's not what people usually using. They're usually using the blueprints, and they're not as flexible and as versatile and as like integratable. So yeah, there's definitely different reasons, but I think one of them is like definitely the one where I'm laughing about, is that like you would never want to use like pretty Unreal for like that kind of use case.
Yeah, I think it's a really great point. And I heard a phrase from one of my old colleagues when I was at Oculus Facebook. He was at Oculus and now at Meta, but it's a great quote. I'll take it from him. It was like, with Unity, you work like hell to make it look good, whereas with Unreal, you work like hell to make it performant, right? Optimize it for frame rate. So it's like, where do you want to spend your energies? And they both can be very difficult, but when you want to do real interesting things with the Unreal Engine, you have to get pull the source code for the engine, and then recompile, make the changes, recompile the entire engine, and the engine can be over 100 gigs when you compile it from source. So yeah, I mean, just kind of different. There are different things or different issues you have to tackle, and that actually brings me back to a conversation I think you and I have had about standards in the metaverse, right? So as these social VR experiences grow, kind of what engine do they get built on is an interesting question. It could be a custom engine, but Unity is kind of a good common denominator. And then there's questions around monetization, right? And when we talked about, what strikes me in the early social VR economy is avatar creators are currently getting value, and world creators, right? Like, what do people actually hire out in the social world to do? They're like, hey, I want to create this custom avatar, and they'll go get a great avatar creator, or I want a custom world. So those are all things that strike me as really interesting. And I think one thing you mentioned, which actually struck me for the first time, was around standardization, right? Having standards, for example, for avatars, where the avatar could work. Let's say it's an NFT in Somnium space, in a VRChat, elsewhere. So I'd love to kind of talk about that, kind of related to the engines, but more about how are NFTs going to be integrated into the metaverse? How do you foresee them? And what does that sort of economy look like?
Yes, and we're actually in a really good state, I think, or at least like looking at like getting to a really good state regarding that, because just like recent developments where really like all bigger companies are looking at working together and looking at adapting common standards and also developing those standards, like, for example, TLB and VRM, and like things where you know that like if my 3D object is packaged and exported in that way, and I can even like put metadata to it, for example, then other people can definitely use it and can use it like across platforms. And I think that becomes really important at the point when we say like, okay, an avatar that I own as an NFT is something that I'm wearing. So obviously you want to take what you're wearing not only to one platform, because like there's different use cases in different platforms, and you might want to like get some of like all of them, and you want to take your things. Or if it's not the whole avatar, it's at least like a t-shirt. And in the best case, like of course right now, like there's a couple of things when we look at different spaces, they all look a bit different, you know, fashion items like t-shirts look a bit different in Decentraland than they would look in Somnium Space or VRChat, or crypto boxes especially, right? So there's like huge differences between the social spaces, but I could also imagine like that as a creator, you like get out a package where it's like all these versions are in there, they're in a format like a VRM, and it is made clear that if I put this on my chest bone, it's definitely going to fit as a pullover. And that is also what we're looking at in the community and Somnium space, especially, is like, okay, so we all build our worlds, and we all know there's going to be avatars coming into those worlds. So now we have to make sure if this avatar picks up a hat in my world and wears it, that it's at the same point in my world than it's someone else's world, because otherwise like he picks the avatar hat up and in my world it looks good, and in someone else's world it's like all over the head or something. And so these are things that will become more and more important as we actually put value behind our assets, behind our digital fashion that we're wearing, because like that's something like that we have to take for granted. You know, when people pay for a t-shirt, they want that it fits like every day of the week and not only one day, right? Like so that is really something that creators are currently looking into, and these standards and best practices are basically also what are being formed as we speak. And there's a couple of communities that are really looking into that, like I would say full time even. So like I'm in the Metaverse crew, which is like a community with creators that are all in different kind of metaverses, active in different kind of social VR platforms. And then there's also the M3, which we are very like close friends with, community friends with. And they just also launched a or like people from the M3 launched a project which is called Webaverse, which is like all run on web. It's also super interesting, and they're like everything regarding interoperability and also open standards is like one of their core areas that they put a lot of work and effort in. But I would say like those are people that even collect your information and so on, and make that information accessible for bigger groups and for bigger like new users also getting into the space. So I think it's really important, like we as a community in Somnium space, we work actively with these people that are multipliers, and like, okay, so you need to look at that, because that's important, because that is something, you know, as a new creator, you come into the space, you have to think about so many things. You might not think about the things that are not even playing a role in the first place, but are super important later on, that this actually all fits together. So I think we're in a pretty good way from what I can see. Fingers crossed,
Yeah,
obviously, but
fingers crossed. I love it. That's pretty incredible. And I'd love to dive deeper on, you were kind enough to show me Roots Club, which was amazing to be able to be in a party in virtual reality. So how did you first, get into the idea of just, like what was your first party experience in virtual reality? How did you then come to, love it so much that you created an entire club, which is incredible, and I can't wait to check it out in a few minutes again. Yeah, I'd love to understand the sort of, the genesis of Roots Club, why you decided to build it where you built it. I think you built it in Somnium Space, right? Or I forget if you have another version in other in other social VR experiences, but I would love to hear more about it.
Yeah, I think actually the inspiration, like to really make my own club, came from being bullied while I was like in VRChat going to another club, which was Tunnel Club at that time. And I was like, okay, I just can't go to these public worlds, to these public clubs. They are not even like built the way I would build them. I wouldn't make a long, lonely tunnel where you walk and it's all like, a kind of an experience where you can be attacked potentially. So I think it really started then where I was like, okay, I want to do something that is like designed for like from females or non-binary identifying individuals for that group, because like still there's so few female players in the space compared to men. Like it's just still something that like stuns me every time, and I'm like surprised by it all over again, coming to new platforms, how few females are actually active and enabled to like really do what they want to do on that platform, because sometimes it really stops for people with another person being a bully, and just like you don't want to be exposed to that, and that's why you don't go anymore. And I think especially I'm seeing that a lot with female and non-binary identifying individuals that might not be like the norm, and especially not like the gender norm. And then like it's also, if you don't make your own avatars, what are you going to wear? Because like a lot of the avatars that are made and that are online, even if they're not animes, they're like super sexualized. And a lot of the like avatar makers are men. And then I'm like, oh, I don't want to wear that, And it just, a lot of it doesn't feel made for women to feel comfortable and to feel like a safe space. And I think this was a big driver of wanting to build Roots Club, because I'm also a pole dancer. I love dance, and with being a pole dancer, I'm also, if I'm not standing my ground and partner up with people that understand what I'm doing there, and that it's like high intensity sports and performance, I'm basically in a very vulnerable position, and I'm putting myself out there being very vulnerable. And so for me, it was the most important thing to have a safe space where I can do that, and where I know who gets in and who doesn't. And we have the coolest parties, like you've been at one, right?
Yeah.
So it's always fun. And we have actually by now only female DJs. Like I had a couple, I like mixed DJs, like with just cool people. But by now, like it kind of made the round also that like this is a place where female DJs like to play. And so yeah, so it's really something that's like growing from the ground, basically, of just like finding other women that are in the space that are like, yeah, I need people like you, because like I can't be there by myself.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate, the kinds of you go to virtual reality to escape VR, to escape some of the things in the real world that are happening, but it's really unfortunate when some of the bad things happening in the real world translate into into the virtual world. And it actually brings me to the question, and one I've thought about a lot. But what do you think are some of the drivers of the gender imbalance that you see in VR? And personally, it's interesting because my wife plays a lot of Beat Saber, for example. When we're kind of in the
Yes.
mountains, it was COVID, and she like just really likes. I had to get her own headset because we couldn't at some point we couldn't keep sharing. So she has her own headset and she plays her own Beat Saber. But social VR is very different, right? And I noticed, even female employees at our company, I would fall in love with some virtual reality social experience, like Population One, or Rec Room, or some other just social, or even Echo Arena, which is this kind of zero gravity thing. But and then I would have some of our team come in. Our team is very diverse. We have women, men, and just people from all around the world. And I did notice that was actually when I firsthand noticed that different people get reacted to differently depending on their voice or their mannerisms in virtual reality. So I've had a few eye-opening experiences, not had them directly, but I'd love to get your thoughts about why there is such a lack of sort of that kind of gender diversity. Is it related to gaming PCs? They tend to skew more towards men in terms of people who buy them. So maybe that's one thing, but I feel like there's more to that answer than just that. So I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, it's a big one. It's definitely a big one. I think one is that also the headsets, like except the Wolf Index, which has this like cushion in the back, none of those headsets is really designed for female head shape necessarily. Then also hairstyles. Like I'm wearing not a very female hairstyle, but like women with like especially also dreads or buns, like African hair or something. Like there's like lots of issues that we're seeing because of that. So I think that plays a big role. And then it can also be that you, if you are in front of other people, you feel more self-conscious. Usually women do feel more self-conscious about how they're looking, about their bodies, etc., especially if they're seen by other people. So I think all these things play a role. And then also that like as soon as you're in VR and people or men notice, oh, she's a woman, then they're like all around you like flies, right? So or it happens. It's not like that everywhere, but like it's just something that happens and that you see in the media over and over again. What I think is a thing that I've been also seeing with women in immersive tech is that if there's a group of women in there, then that like is a start and a driver for bigger groups forming and for like also more confidence in how do I use the menus and so on and so on. If you continuously go in with a friendly group, you learn yourself, your way around so well that you're not as vulnerable and exposed anymore in the first place. So all these kind of things I've been seeing, I think they're amazing. And also in my club, what is one of the topics that I'm looking at is how emotional and maybe in the future also sexual intimacy could look like in VR. Because I think one of the things that we just keep on seeing is like, for example, on Horizon Worlds, big in the media, that people get raped, women get raped. And so I think one of the things is like, there has never been yet a really good educational approach of like, how can emotional intimacy look like in the metaverse? Like, what does it look like to be close and to be like with another person that you get to like over social VR? So how does this all look like? To define that might be an opportunity also to counter like what is currently happening. There's no kind of like VR social etiquette of like how you say that you might find someone attractive. So, all these kind of things I think are like areas that like Enrich Club do play a big role in terms of how this is all designed as well.
One of the questions I have is, what are the things specific in the design of Roots Club that help you achieve your goals? And is Roots Club just an ever evolving thing? Like, do you kind of push new quote builds on a relatively regular basis? And like, I guess, what are the things you're tweaking to achieve the kinds of goals that you talked about?
So for me, it's very much about play testing as well. And what I'm doing is I set up very many different areas. One of the things that I noticed by accident is that inverse normal. So spheres where in the middle you can't look out, but from the outside you can look in. This is something which makes so much sense because you can still see other people and you can see like what's happening and you don't feel lost or cut off. So because like it happens that people get lost in VR or something, you know, and they might get scared or whatever, but like as you can see through everything and everything is kind of open, this is something that definitely helps. Another thing is just like blocking bullies that are known to have bullied in the past, to just like tell them like this is not what's gonna happen, and then obviously they have a chance to have a conversation, but still it's like one of the most important things, because that's what happens in real clubs as well, right? Like you get banned, like so that is something that just I think it's like super important to keep a safe space. But on the other hand, it's also like I'm working with another project that is like a VR dating app. And so just like seeing what do people do, how do people progress in like finding each other online, and like what things might be important in VR. And we've seen anything and everything in VRChat, from like there's even separate like sections. They're called penetration shaders because of like what people usually do in VRChat and all the private worlds. And so this is something I definitely rather want to leave out, because I've already seen like a whole lot of you know, kind of situations where especially people that might previously have experienced all certain kinds of traumas do react not that well if things are getting too visual. So I think this is something that definitely is like something I'm avoiding, to like make any kind of reference to a real world visual scenery where people are usually exploring intimacy. So I think one of the strengths around Roots Club is really that it's so otherworldly and like so not attached to anything people have experienced in real life, at least from the surroundings.
I think it's a really great explanation. So thanks for sharing that. I think I'd want to, before we dive into VR, just kind of learn a little bit about your hopes for, you know, Somnium Space is a blockchain-enabled social VR space. How do you think in the future, you know, like I'm on this council now that's about VR and value creation. So I'm just curious about, and what's interesting about that, it was actually Metaverse and value creation. And what was interesting about that was, you know, we talked at first about NFTs and blockchain. That was kind of like, I was surprised we didn't talk about VR. We actually talked about NFTs and blockchain first. What are your thoughts in the future? Like, so do you see a future where worlds get monetized to some degree, like tickets to a club, for example, or, you know, you're paying for an avatar from an avatar creator, world creator? Like, how does this economy develop, and what do you think the ultimate, you know, kind of version of that future looks like? How would you articulate it?
Interesting question for sure. I think the ultimate future is always hard to say, but I do believe that it's a very going to be a very everyday thing, a normal thing to go to a party like we did last weekend, where we, you know, like we met before, we thought about what are we gonna wear, and then like talked about like where the location is, how do we get there, and so on, you know. And then like we go to the party, we like meet like new DJs, hear like new music, meet interesting people and avatars. And so I think this is just an experience that's going to be way more widespread, because it's something that's so convenient. Like you're still at home, you're in your own like comfortable four walls, and you're just like at a party at the same time. And like as I'm usually going in there full body tracked and sometimes also with wireless, like we've been both like dancing together with full body tracking, which was very like realistic, you know, in my mind. Like when I'm dancing at this party, I'm dancing and I see myself dancing, right? On the in the mirrors and so on. And so yeah, I think just to be an extension of our everyday life, no matter what it might be in that moment, it's probably less going to be parties than other things. But I think whatever it might be in that moment that you want to do, that you can't do in your real life because of whatever it might be, whatever kind of like disabling thing you might have in that moment, that's what you're going to do in VR. And I think a lot of it is probably going to be education and also health, wellness, counseling, all of these kind of things. Coaching, like I'm working at the moment with a movement coach, and he does workshops and he teaches usually big groups and how to envision certain scenarios. And I'm working together with him to visualize that in VR instead, to like give these people a bit of support in terms of like envisioning those environments that might be helpful for whatever is happening in that therapy. It could be anything.
I think it's really interesting because, did you watch that HBO documentary, We Met in Virtual Reality? I think it was a VRChat. It was a
Yeah,
documentary.
I've actually seen the European premiere and met with
Oh, wow.
a group of people because I know them from VR.
That's
I
pretty
met
incredible.
them first in virtual
You
reality
have
as
them
well,
in
and then
VR.
we met in real life in Copenhagen, which was very funny.
That's pretty
Yeah.
incredible. One thing that struck me about that is, to your point, it's like, well, there's games. Games is obviously I would say currently the sort of the biggest use case for virtual reality. I mean, forget education and medical right now. I mean, they're absolutely coming, but for now, I think games is kind of number one. But when it comes to social VR, there's of course social VR games. The Echo Arenas, the Population Ones of the world. But when it comes to VRChat, it's more about hanging out. And I noticed the core use case there is, partying, like going to these clubs, having virtual DJs. That seems to be a pretty big use case for social VR, right? When you take away the game
Yes.
factor. Why do you think
Yes.
that's the case? I mean, it's not even like virtual performances, meaning like, like story performances or anything else. It seems like partying is just like one of the core cases. And of course, people like to do that, so maybe that's the answer. But I'm just curious, why is it that that's
Yeah.
what it is? You had a dance instructor, and we met in VR, along with sign language, which I found interesting. I can't sign, so I don't know why I'm doing
Yeah.
that with my
Yeah.
hands. But it was just really intriguing to see the ways. But definitely, dancing and partying; those seem to be very core cases for social VR, and I don't quite maybe fully understand why that's kind of it. But I do intuitively feel like that must be true. But yeah, I'd love to hear your
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah, no, singing and dancing is like are the core things that people do together, right? And that has been since like centuries, right? Like be it like on festivals or around fires, or like, like singing and dancing are kind of the basics that people do before they do anything else, I think, as like social activities. And as we can't go drink, which is another thing people like to do together if they're too shy to sing and dance, then like we go in VR. And obviously also because like we're not probably we're not as shy. Like I couldn't be a pole dancer in real reality because I wouldn't want to show my body to everyone. But then in VR I can do it because I'm as free like as I can be to dance. And so I think there's a lot of that as well, that like people just look good in their avatars and they feel good in what they're wearing. And so for them it's like a great opportunity to enjoy partying or like dancing.
If that's the case with pure social VR, that's got to be one of the things that is emphasized, right? Along with, I think, full body tracking. I mean, when did you discover full body tracking, and how much do you think that changes the VR game, right? Full body tracking. I mean, do you think it's, I mean, a lot of people now have Quests, which are great for accessibility, but of course, as of today, you don't have full body tracking with that. Do you feel like that's a big difference in a virtual reality experience, or do you think it's just a marginal incremental increase to be able to have your legs?
No, it's huge in my opinion, but also I think it differs from person to person how big of an impact it has. So for me, in my real life, my body is super important. I don't even sit down when I work. I'm standing right now. So for me, my legs are super important. I'm dancing as well, right? So being on my feet and expressing myself through my body is a huge part of who I am, right? And so for me, it's a huge deal to be able to see myself move in VR and to be fully embodied like that, and to see if I'm sitting down, that my legs cross because they actually cross and not that they kind of go weird on the floor. So for me, it's very important. For other people, it might not be that important because they rather sit down anyways. So for them, it doesn't make such a big difference. But yeah, the immersion that comes with seeing your actual limbs move like your VR limbs, I think is a really, really huge deal. Basically, as much as getting your arms. Like in the beginning, we just had the headset, then we got the arms, now we get the legs, right?
Yeah.
So in my perspective, it makes a huge difference.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So I know we talked about traveling with VR gear. So do you actually just travel with all that stuff? I mean, traveling with a Quest 2 is very easy relative to the old days. But nowadays, if you want to get the full experience, it's much harder. I'd love to hear about your travel setup and how you develop on the road.
Yes, I'm actually like at home. I have a very well-cooled, fairly big desktop computer with a 3090 and an extra PCIe slot where my wireless is in. And I love that one. That one I'm using with like 3 base stations and Valve Index. And then when I use pole dancing, I'm using a Vive Wireless. And right now I have the issue of like thinking which headset to take, and I'm probably gonna still take the Index with the 3 base stations because it's just like what I usually use and what I'm most comfortable in. Then I'm also gonna take the trackers, and I have another small PC build, which is basically the same contents. It's also a 3090, but it has a small motherboard that also only has like 2 RAM slots. So I had to get like all kinds of new stuff for that little build, and that just so fits in a carry-on suitcase. So that, and then like clothes, I'm usually using to wrap around my headset and the controllers and so on. But yeah, it's no fun. It's heavy, and it's actually, I just need it because I'm developing. Otherwise, like I wouldn't recommend that.
Sure, sure. You must have to bring a monitor as well then too, right? If you have a PC.
So usually like in hotel rooms, they usually always have a screen that you can plug onto your PC. And then also in Amsterdam, I'm going to the XR base, and they have a screen for me. And then I keep on traveling to Prague, where I already asked at the VR Play Park if they have a screen for me. So it's kind of planning the travels. It's also planning to have a screen in every city that you travel to. So yeah, no fun.
Yeah, I remember in the early days in 2013, 2014, we would take these Falcon Tikis, which were, I mean, they fit just barely into a carry-on. And then in that case, I would bring a small monitor, or the early Vives, you could see the monitor inside of the early headset. So I would like try to do the clicking on there. But out of curiosity, why not I mean, laptops have gotten to a point where, you have powerful ones that are VR ready. What's the reason not to bring a laptop? Why the PC build in particular?
Yeah, because like with what I'm doing, the laptops overheat very fast. So they just get too hot, and I bulged my battery already twice in the VR laptop that I'm running because it just continuously runs too hot. And also it just gets really slow. And as I'm developing, I'm doing things fast, and they have a lot of polygons, and they need a lot of like render capacity. And so basically it's a time thing. it's just like that I can just work so much faster because I can use all my like half ready assets that are unoptimized, and I can just run them all as if they don't weigh anything. And so that's just like the big pro. But yeah, it's heavy. It's way heavier than the old desktops that you had because of the 3090, which is just itself like a beast of tech. And yeah.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Well, I'd be super fascinated to get more tips about how to travel well with VR. But there's I can't wait for the technology to improve. And frankly, these new Apple, MacBook Pros with the M1, and now the M2 chips, but the M1 Pro and the M1 Max. I mean, they're just such great chips. I can't wait for Apple to support VR natively, because you can have such a powerful computer that runs really well, and hopefully eventually supports VR, which since Steam VR dropped Apple Mac support, we haven't been able to get natively at least. So, well,
fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, I'm definitely doing that. So I think I've learned so much, but I can't. I think now's the time to really dive into VR and check out Roots Club. Yeah. I can't wait. Yeah. So yeah, let's dive in.
Great. Tech issues all over the place. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's amazing to be here in your world and in your club after hanging out with you IRL. I don't know if this is more IRL than, they're just different realities, I guess.
Yes.
But it's awesome to be here.
Yes. Here's also my cat. Like, you didn't get to see her IRL, but she was actually with me in the room. But now you can see her in VR. So when we walk over here, like, you can teleport up on her head. And I can, like, kind of get a shot. Oh, yeah, there you go. Yeah, exactly. Good one. So yeah, so this is usually like the dance floor where people come in, and so like one of the main areas. And here's also my pole.
Awesome.
Wow. So yeah, so there's like a trigger like when you walk in.
Translucent. Holy cow, that's amazing.
And then we have like usually like the web player here where the DJs are playing, and so we can probably click the video from Saturday where Ollie was playing in Roots Club, where you've been here as well, and probably see ourselves on the screen. So the Twitch page, it's what automatically loads, and the last video from Ollie is basically the one from Saturday and the party you've been at as well. There we go. So yeah. We have some flying cats and a cat that's guarding the DJ when they're basically playing over there. And,
is that the cat up there? Over?
Yes, yeah, that's like the big Alice, kind of like guarding the crowd and the DJs that are playing, so everyone stays safe in Roots Club.
That's awesome. So you have cats as bouncers?
Yeah, basically like the resident DJs and also like the good friends of Roots Club. They are all cats, so yeah, and we call it the Cat a Day disco night usually.
And the way it works, I noticed on Catterday that basically the person's audio who's on here is amplified.
Yes, exactly. Clients. And it's great that you're doing this right now, so we can see the audio reactivity on the shaders in here. So whenever you talk, you can see like the shaders going off. Exactly.
Hello, this is me talking and seeing the shaders going off. Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
So like every beat is.
Yeah.
Oh, I see it.
Yeah, it's basically all like an audio spectrum that's being read out. Oopsie. Mm-hmm. And and so this is like in all kinds of shaders, but especially these two stripes and also these chains over here. And yeah, you can also hide inside the cat, by the way. But so if you wanna like hide away from people, like yeah, you can go inside the cat. Like there's a tiny little
Do you
space.
just walk? Do you just walk into the? Oh, I see.
You have to teleport inside.
Oh yeah. Okay. I think I'm. Am I
Where's
inside?
my
This is inside.
camera? The camera only got half inside. Yeah, so this is like how you can sit inside the cat if you need a little hiding spot.
So this is like the introverts kind of haven.
Yeah, yeah, just in case. So yeah, here basically like this upper dance floor is like I think a very cool spot to just like dance under the sky.
Yeah, how are you guys feeling today?
If you like, we can also check out Ollie's VR guitars. So the DJ that just plays, she actually has a little booth over here where she has her guitars.
So this is what you mean by no kind of long tunnels. It's kind of just super open.
Yeah, it's super open, and if there's like spaces where there's an inside, they usually don't have doors, and you can always like walk out and
Sure.
yeah, get out fast. Or there even like over here, there's like half see-through, half transparent. So yeah, this is her booth, and this one you can
Oh, it's
actually
grabbable.
pick up. Yeah. Wah! Whoopsie.
Cool.
I have to like fix the collider on this one, but yeah. So yeah, you can grab it.
That is just so cool. Yeah, so you do have grabbables in this world.
Yes.
It's gonna be fun when people. I've seen people play instruments in VR, but it's usually like, you know, they have like a fake instrument and then they'll be playing with their hands.
Yeah, and she's actually a musician, like singer and DJ, and she usually plays with her real guitar. So for her, it was very natural to like make a VR guitar as a wearable.
Do you meet most of your VR friends in VR? Is that? I mean, I guess it's or do you meet a lot of them IRL first? What's the?
No, actually in VR by now. Kind of as we were talking about before as well, that in the beginning years, it was more like real life friends that then got into VR, or people that you met at conferences that also like VR. But by now, it's actually the people that you like meet inside of VR, and then you just hang out with them so much that you become friends.
I've noticed a lot of my IRL friends. Some of them, most of them like VR. Some of them don't like VR. But it's like I've noticed people I've met in VR tend to be in VR because it self-selects for people in VR, right? But I found, my IRL friends, most of them like, you know, will try a game and they'll like it, but a few of them will go and buy headsets, but I don't see a lot of them. Most of them don't spend a lot of time in social VR or just in VR in general to make friends in VR.
Yeah.
To, you know, because those people self-select to want to be in VR for a long time.
You have to have a headset if you actually want to spend time in VR, because usually like if you show friends your stuff in your own VR, then you can't take them around like I do take you around right now. So
Exactly.
it's like you kind of want to have the opportunity to actually experience VR as it should be experienced.
Totally. You know, my trick was a few years ago when Quest first came out, like Quest 1, I would actually take 2 quests to like my friend's place.
Yeah, exactly.
And we would load up together and we would play. But the silly thing about that is we had to mute our mics in VR because otherwise they would cross, you know, talk feedback. So it wasn't as convenient, but it was still pretty fun.
Yeah, and then you're kind of becoming this, I have it with a lot of couples that go together in VR. And then like one of them has to mute themselves and the other one's like 2 people speak through them. So it's always very weird experience.
Yeah.
Exactly. I know what you mean. I've done that with my wife. We've gone into
Yeah.
social VR together.
Yeah.
You can't see this in real life. I mean, there's just very little here that has a real life analog, which I think is what makes it so great.
I think so too. I think that's also like so powerful in VR that
Yeah.
you can build things how you want to and experiment how things look cool and whatnot. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of that. I'm not a fan at all of like building places after the real world. So yeah, and that becomes pretty clear when you go in here, I guess. Yeah.
One of the things I noticed a lot in clubs and VR clubs are the prevalence of mirrors that are usually off, but then you turn them on. Is that something that's...
I do have one mirror up there on the island. We did like dance classes or dance sessions for a while, but it wasn't super popular in here actually. People tend to use their camera more than mirrors. Maybe also because in this kind of location, like you go around a lot, shapes are usually round. But yeah, mirrors somehow not too big. I know every VRChat world has a mirror. They actually call it the mirror disease or something.
Why do you suspect that's the case? What's the reason for...
Well, I think
that,
it makes sense to have mirrors because you are immersed. When you see yourself and like, oh, that's me, I'm moving my head, I'm moving my arms, that's you, right? Yeah.
That's right.
I think it makes total sense to have mirrors. But here, like it's usually, there's so much going on, and also parties usually don't last that long. Like it's around like an hour and a half, where really like people come together and we do this event. Like with the dance classes, for example, like it was maybe like half an hour or something that those lasted, because after that people were just too sweaty. Like I would say like the user group that comes in here in Somnium is a bit... They have like their chops and stuff. Also, they're like real life chops, and so I think they just don't have the time also to spend so much time in VR. So for them, it's like rather a short amount of time, and then it's very intense and with friends and dancing.
That's amazing. So, what is the inspiration for these avatars we're wearing? So thank you for... This is an awesome avatar. I think it's cat, right? I'm a cat with a VR headset on.
Yes, exactly.
And it's an NFT, right? Is that the...
so avatars, this is actually not minted. So avatars in Somnium Space. So Somnium Space is a multi-chain metaverse where there's like different blockchain integrations. And so you can pull up any kind of NFT avatar that has previously been minted through Somnium. You can either upload your own custom creations through Unity onto your account, or you can go on OpenSea and then like buy any kind of NFT avatars that you can then later on sell. But like there's a bit of a fee involved as well to mint the avatars. And so right now a lot of the avatars are actually like my avatars. A lot of them are not NFT avatars, just because for me I try to like just keep the ownership in a way that I never give away my data and I never put them online or anything. And at the point when I would have a good format or concept or an NFT that would make sense for this collection to actually be minted. Maybe I'm gonna mint some on Somnium, of these cat avatars. Like they're the cool cats. So usually they're inspired by my friends, or like just like the look and feel of Roots Club. And there's a whole couple of them. And you're one of the cool cats, exactly.
I'm one of the cool cats, thanks. That's amazing. Boom.
We still needed the interaction. They just implemented that in VRChat, like the haptics.
Yeah, Rec Room has had this since day one.
Yes, true.
What's the inspiration for the cats, by the way? Is that something that has always been... I know you own a cat.
Yes. It's her. It's all my cat. She's called Alice Peach, and she's a naked cat. And so she feels like a peach. That's why she's called Alice Peach. And obviously Alice is a bit like Alice in Wonderland, inspired of like you can
Down the rabbit hole.
exactly. You can live in this wonderful abstract environment. And so, so Alice is always very sad when I go into VR. And obviously, she doesn't know that everything in VR is full of her.
That's pretty amazing. So you're still with Alice when you're inside of Roots Club.
Yeah, I really,
yourself.
really love her. She's my best friend. She's such a cute little creature. And every time when I go in VR, she's kind of sad and she's like, all right, she's gone. She really notices, like, as soon as I'm in VR, she doesn't take me as like a full human being anymore. She's like, oh, okay, she's gone. Yeah.
Cats are so smart. So.
She's such a smart one, that's true.
Oh, I really wish we had met Alice in the camera because that's such an amazing thing to see her in the camera and then in Roots Club.
She's extremely
reincarnated as
beautiful.
I can sense the love. I can sense the feelings.
Yes.
So going back to the avatars on the blockchain, the question I have is, so you said Somnium Space is multi-chain, so I take it it supports like Ethereum, but it probably also supports other
Solana
blockchain?
as well. So they have Polygon, FTX. I'm not 100% sure. I've only been minting on Ethereum.
So when you mint it on Somnium, then it gets put into their servers, or is it on IPFS, or how does the data get stored? To your point, actually, your question.
Yeah, so it's actually directly like it's a token, but it's directly on Ethereum blockchain. How they are reading out the token, it's like there's some like additional things like when you go in the builder in Somnium Space, so you download the launcher, you go into the PC client, and there you actually have a whole like builder interface, and there you can add a couple of data to it. So there's like a couple of information. So it's like this kind of format all gets minted with this like token. So this token includes like not only the avatar itself, like the 3D models and everything, but also all the information that comes with it. And they are also working with a couple other companies together to potentially like make their integration, like their blockchain integration, accessible for other projects.
So that's great. And so you're cautious of putting something on, a server when you don't necessarily have full control over that, right? It's not fully decentralized, I think, right?
I'm very interested in the whole idea of decentralization, and that goes for obviously like the platform itself and the idea, but also the server structures. I find like a really interesting thing, because often it also happens that you have like the coolest decentralized project, and then you have some Amazon cloud servers running in the background that are like not working as well. And so that happens over and over again. So this is also, this world, for example, runs on a decentralized server structure in the back. So we're using Somnium Space for a while. The world is like loading 3 megabytes of the Somnium Space world, and then the rest is like on this decentralized server, which I think is like a great opportunity, especially if you're looking to create a safe space and to own your data.
Do you have thoughts about how you're going to sounds like monetization is not top of mind, but would the idea be like, oh, I really like this avatar, you would go buy it on OpenSea or something and integrate it back into a world like this, and then hopefully be able to use the avatar across platforms, but right now there's no cross-platform compatibility, but is that effectively?
Definitely. One of the things with my own assets, like an avatar shop and so on, but also as you see the guitars, you can actually buy them as NFTs on OpenSea right now. This one is called Blue Agave. So these wearables and collectibles you could get in Roots Club. So people actually come for a party, but then they buy some merch. What was I saying? Monetization. Yeah. So this is something that plays a role currently, but I think in the future it will also just be like entry in the club, right? That could totally be a thing that people are gonna want to play for a rather exclusive experience. With probably like limited space in the world.
The thing that struck me about social VR even many years ago is it actually really feels in some ways like I'm interacting with you more here than it was back in the back when we were on camera. It just like you get people's
I completely agree.
Just their body language, they're in 3 dimensions. So I think as these things become more accessible, as the quests and things like it become smaller and smaller, it really just feels like this is just going to be normal. People are going to be going out. I don't know if that's I worry about some things about that future, right? But I think there's a lot of really interesting things also that are going to come from that future, right? Both good and bad, but hopefully more good.
Yes, obviously, like there's a lot of risks, but there's also a lot of promises. And I think it always comes down to like using it in the right way and using it so that the like human is still in the center of it, right? That this is designed for like a human coming in here and doing human things.
And we can be cats while doing it.
Exactly.
Or any other thing that it's going to be so interesting when this becomes mainstream, right? I mean, it's like, for a while I asked you the question about how we thought about VR, and for a while I kind of, was concerned that people bought, all these big VR headsets and they just served as paperweights. They just didn't really use them. But I think that, as I go back into VR with COVID giving VRChat and other things a boost, I've come back in after a while. Every time I come back in, there seems to be there's more things happening. And it's just great. I mean, we sometimes forget when we work in VR, at least I do, how great VR can be, but it really is just an amazing tool that humans have created.
Yes.
Right? I mean, we're literally, you're in Europe, I'm in the United States, and we're interacting as if we're just right next to each other. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and especially also the party, all these kinds of things that you can do. It's just so much more than you could otherwise do without VR. So I'm continuously being amazed by how much this gives me and like how much this like enriches my life in so many different ways. And I'm with you on like just like the potential and like the amazement for VR is just like increasing for me the better I get to know the medium and the technology.
I feel like we should get all of our mutual friends, we should get them all into VR and hang out. I don't know if you've hung out with some of our mutual friends in VR.
Yes,
before,
but like I was still like looking to organize a get-together for our old VR AR council, and I think that's still something that we should do.
Let's do it. Let's do it. I can't think of a better place than the world you've created.
Well, it's PC VR, so that's still a bit hard, accessibility.
Yeah, in the world we're creating that I think you saw, it's like optimization was like so big. So, I mean, that was in Unreal, so we had to work a lot to get it optimized. We actually have a Unity version as well, which also worked decently well on Quest, but it's so hard because the PC VR experience gets you everything. I mean, you get legs, you can't get that. I mean, I guess with the R00TS X, you can get legs with a Quest, but you still need you still need to plug into a PC.
Yep.
But it's like the visual fidelity, the things you get with PC VR is always in contradiction with mass accessibility, right? So how do you strike that balance, I guess is the question.
I agree.
Like this amazing reflective shader would be hard to get performing on Quest, right? So we talk a lot about that.
Yeah.
Mirrors and other things, just reflective surfaces in general are difficult.
Yeah.
So do you plan to continue to build for PC VR, or do you have like thoughts? you have thoughts about Quest compatibility too, or do you just not care about Quest compatibility?
Yeah, no, I do actually have plans for Roots Club that it goes in layers, you know, like I have also to have a presence on Webverse, on Horizon Worlds, and all these different platforms, but just up until a degree. And then I see the Somnium Space World as kind of like the deepest, most immersive layer that you can go into. But otherwise, like, yeah, you can have experiences in Roots Club in different platforms and different, like, intensity levels. Because Webverse, you can even go from your phone browser, right?
Right.
So, and here you, in the best case, want to have, like, full body tracked VR and just come dance, right? So this is, like, a different way of consuming that whole space. And I think that's also something, you know, optimization is going to be happening way more in like certain areas than in other areas. And what we are also seeing, like in applications, they're just putting Doom sprites and they're making them from the avatars, you know, like you put your avatar, you get a Doom sprite and you have everything being super performant. So this is just something that is an option. But this is not like the core of this world. So this world is really like most immersive and like most intense experience, I'd say.
When Quest first came out, I thought maybe building for the Quest is the right thing. And then, you know, and I still think that's the right thing for some game developers just because of the accessibility. But it really feels like, for example, if you're building social VR and it's about partying, the core use cases are going to be people with full body tracking, and all those people are going to be PC VR. So in some ways, you want to build for that small market of people who aren't served very well, and then you can port that over to Quest or, you know, re-optimize it. That almost seems like the better strategy, just because, you know, people with PC VR full body tracking is a very small but growing market. It just feels like a underserved market as well, one that can, I don't know, just thinking about thoughts here, options about how to build and grow.
Yeah, and that's really something that we're gonna see happening the next couple of years, like how this is gonna, like with all the communities that are basically very platform specific currently, how this is all gonna go forward. This is also something that's very interesting to see in the Metaverse crew that I'm spending this Thursdays with. That it's really like, so it's really like people are very stuck to their kind of main platform that they like spend most of the time on. They're kind of natives on that platform. And the motivation to really go explore somewhere else is not always that high. So, that's interesting to see how this is going to go forward.
Well, thank you so much. I feel like I've learned so much and just experienced so much.
Yeah,
I mean,
thanks
it's
for
amazing
coming.
to be in the world. Yeah, of course. I feel like it's like a window into Sarah's mind. You know,
Yeah,
just
it is.
Getting a sense.
It definitely
Very
is.
visceral.
Yes.
In a very visceral way. It's
That's
very
for
inspiring,
sure.
Sarah. You're such an inspiration. I'm so happy
thanks
to
for
have
coming.
spent this time and have had a
I give you a
amazing time hanging
VR
out.
hug.
Oh, yeah. Virtual hug. And thanks for this amazing avatar. I feel this is
Of course.
just so cool.
Yeah, well dressed.
Well dressed, yeah, appropriately dressed for the world.
All right, cool.
Well,
Yeah,
till
see you
next time, I
soon.
can't wait to have more
Yeah,
parties
come
and
to the
hang out.
next
It's gonna be
one.
fun.
I'm going to let you know.
Let me know.
And
I'll
tell
be
all
there.
your friends that have PC VR.
I will.
All right,
I will.
bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye, you too.